Welcome back, Adam here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to complete the self-employment pages of the self-assessment tax return using our GoSimpleTax software, which you can use in browser with no need to download anything beforehand. Before we get into it today, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more helpful tax content. I'm also going to link down below to our webpage so you can access the exact same software that I'm using here on screen. You're just going to need an email address and a UTR number and your basic contact information to get yourself signed up. And before we jump across and start looking at the software and the entries that you'll need to make, these are the figures that I'm going to be declaring to HMRC in our example. You can see that I've got a very simple setup. I've got 70,000 of turnover, some additional expenditure in there, car, staffing, accountancy, phone, and then use of home totaling £16,000, which leaves me with a net profit from self-employment for the 22-23 tax year of £54,000. Now let's switch across and have a look at how we actually declare this income to HMRC. So here we are, I've logged into GoSimpleTax and I'm ready to complete the 22-23 tax return, which runs and covers the period from the 6th of April 2022 through to the 5th of April 2023. You can see here it's very simple, the setup, and very easy to use. So in order to add a new section of the return, in this example I want to declare my self-employed income, then I can click on New Page, and then from here I just need to select the type of income that I have. Now, of course, everybody's situation is different. So if you have employment income and self-employed income, you would need to add a page for each type of income you have. You might have capital gains, you might have rental income. In today's example, I'm just looking at the self-employed section. So I'll want to look at self-employed, which is section SA 103 or page SA 103. And I can add that by clicking select. From here, I'm then presented with a page to input the details of my self-employment. The business name, now people often overthink this. This is more like a reference both for GoSimpleTax but also for HMRC. This does go across to HMRC, this information, but you don't really need to worry about whether somebody else is already using that name. It's more like a reference for them. Whether you can actually trade with that name, you know, in the real world is a different question. But for these purposes, it's more like a reference. And if you just want to use your own name, if you don't really have a trading name, that's perfectly fine. I'm just going to put example, and then below that you can see the business type. Now when you've got a question mark next to it, you can use that to get a little bit more information. So you can see here, if none of these apply, please select other trades. So if in my example I was a carpenter, you can see from the drop down I can find that in here. If I couldn't find carpenter for some reason, if it was a bit of an obscure trade, then you'll always have the option of other trades at the bottom. So if I take that out and I put electrician, I've still got other trades at the bottom. So if you can't find anything, then of course just go back to other trades. And it doesn't need to be great detail, this, it's just giving them an idea of what it is you do for that trade. Now your address, you'll need to enter below here. I'm just going to put, again, an example here, and then you can scroll down and follow on from there. Now, your accounting period. So again, this is something that people often trip up on or have questions over. You can technically choose any accounting period throughout the year. You could have your accounting period end at the end of February, at the end of December, at the end of July, whatever you want. But it can cause confusion if you do choose one of those dates. The easiest date to use is what's been pre-populated here. So this is running exactly in line with the tax year. It's starting from the 6th of April 2022 and it's running through to the 5th of April 2023, exactly the tax year. This means that I would include all transactions, all income and all expenditure between those dates, nice and easy. If for any reason you needed it to be aligned with a calendar month, if you found that easier, you could change the end date to the 31st of March 2023 and you could start it on the 1st of April. So you're still running for a year, but you're running to the end of a calendar month. For some people, that may actually be easier. And those two are the two options that keep it nice and simple. Anything else other than those two, and it can become a little bit more complicated. If I went for a July year end, for example, then you often need to apply, or you would need to apply, opening and closing year rules to determine how much of your profit gets taxed in each tax year. So I would typically be sticking with the end of March or the 5th of April to keep things nice and simple. Below that, you have losses from previous tax years. So again, we've got a question mark so we can get a little bit more information. But your losses from previous tax years, it wants to know what losses you've made in prior years that relate to this self-employment. So to my example self-employment, what losses have I made? If you've made a loss in a prior tax year and you haven't utilized it elsewhere, you can carry it forward and you can utilize it against future profits. So potentially I could, if I made a loss in the prior year, I could reduce my profits in this year by utilizing that loss. In the example, I'll leave it blank with 0, but obviously if you did have losses carrying forward, you need to declare them in here so that HMRC are aware of that. And then the final question on the page, are you a foster carer? So make sure if this applies, you tick it. There can be additional allowances available for foster carers, but that won't apply to my situation. And I'll save, and you can see then it's populated a self-employed page for my example self-employment. Now, like I said, if you do have additional income, maybe you've got employment income, capital gains, then you can go on new page. You can add in, let's go with UK property income. You could add in the property section and you'll be able to again, fill in the basic details and populate an additional page. As well as that, if you had multiple self-employment, so maybe you have a carpenter by day, but then you're selling bits and pieces on eBay by night, that could count as 2 self-employment. So you might want to go and again add a new page, but name your self-employment a different name. That would be absolutely fine. Again, in this example, we only have the one self-employment, we only have the one income, so I'm going to proceed from here. We have a little bit of description up here to give us a little bit of direction. So input your self-employed income and expenses for inclusion on your tax return. Please note, this is not for partnerships or limited companies, which have, if you click on new page, you'll see a partnership SA 104 and you'll find a section for limited companies in here as well. So those do not go in this section, but any individuals that are self-employed would be filling out these pages. So from here, it's very simple. It's a nice easy setup. We've got income at the top and we've got expenses at the bottom. To add income, we click on the plus sign on the right hand side, and then from here we have a drop down. So all we need to do is think back to our example, and we had turnover of £70,000, and find an appropriate category from the drop down. So you have a number of options from here. I'm going to go with sales at the top. I could break it down in more detail, but sales is appropriate, and I'm going to provide one figure for the year. Now, GoSimpleTax is really useful because you can actually use this software for your record keeping as well. So let's say you had a situation where you have a simple business, simple self-employment, and you invoice one client every month. What you could do is use this to, let's say at the end of May, you raise an invoice, and that's agreed fee for May, and that goes out to your one client, and you invoice them £5,000. I can then attach a copy of that invoice here, and this will serve as my record keeping for HMRC's purposes. I can then save that and then add more income. So then maybe in June, I do the same. So I invoice them for my agreed fee for June to my one client, and maybe this time I invoice them a little bit less, 4,000. Again, I have the option to add a copy of that invoice, and then I can save. And what you can see, it's populating that income one by one, but my total income is being formulated from here. It's my May and my June income. So if you have a simple setup and you want to use the software for your record keeping as well, you can do that and add them one by one. If you've already done what I've done and you've got a total for the year already, then you can always remove one of these lines and then just provide a single figure for the whole year, in which case you wouldn't really need to provide a date for the income because it spans the whole year, and your description may just be turnover 22-23, for example, or whatever you see as appropriate. In this example, I had 70,000 of turnover for the year. I won't attach any copies of invoices, and I'll save there. So that's my income entered already for my self-employment. Nice and easy. On the left hand side, what you're going to notice now is that we have tax due of £19,870.19. Don't panic, that's not really going to be my tax liability, but what's really cool in here is that you have a live tax calculation. So as we enter additional expenses or we change any of these figures, you start to get an idea of what your tax liability is going to be for this tax year here. Okay, so let's enter some of the expenses and we should see that figure decrease as my profit figure also decreases. My tax figure should decrease as well. At the moment, it's just basing it on £70,000 profit, but of course we know I've got expenses to add in as well. So on the right hand side of the orange tab here, we can add an expense group, and I've got 5 types of expenditure that I want to add in. So from here, from the drop down, we can select the different types of expenses that I have. So in our example, I have car, van and travel expenses. I have some staffing. So you just want to find the groups that are similar to how you've broken them down. I've got accountancy. I've got phone and office. And then I've got use of home as office. So I'm going to save that, and those are my 5 different types of expenditure. From here, same setup. To the right hand side of each category, you've got an orange add button. So I can click add. I'll be presented with more categories to break down this expenditure, and I'll just want to choose the appropriate. So in my case, this could be a combination of expenses on my van, expenses on fuel, all different types of things. So I'll just pick the most appropriate. But obviously, if you are using this for record keeping and you want to add in some fuel receipts and you want to add in some servicing invoices, then you can do this one by one. So in this case, I'm just going to go with fuel at the top. I'm not going to provide a date because I'm covering the full year, and I'm just going to say fuel cost for 22-23 tax year. There is always, or often, there is a sliding tab here, so you can adjust for private use. So in my example, I have £5,000 of expenditure in this category. If I actually decided, 10% of that is actually for personal use, I'm not really using it for the business, then I can make that adjustment here, and the software will automatically disallow 10%, £500 of this. I'm not going to put through any private use adjustments in this example, but that is how you can use it. And you can use the toggle here, or you can just overwrite and you can put 10% in here. And again, the software will make the adjustment for you. No attachments in this case. 5,000 agrees back to my spreadsheet. And you can see here, the profit figure is now reducing because I'm adding in some expenditure, and therefore the tax has also reduced. The next category is my staffing. So I'm going to look for an appropriate wording from the drop down, and I'm going to go with wages and salaries. So it could be that I have a part-time member of staff, salaries, and I'll go with 22-23, and I'm going to enter the whole amount for the full year. So I've got £8,000 of salaries from maybe my part-time member of staff. Private use, again, in this one we don't actually have the toggle, but you can enter an amount to adjust for here. So if you want to, it's unlikely for wages and salaries, but for certain other categories, it'll be much more appropriate. So I'll leave that one as blank, but you could adjust from there. And I'll save that one. So now we've got 2 of our 5 expense types in here. The next one is accountancy. So I'll click on here. I've got a drop down and I'm just looking for the most appropriate category. Don't overthink it. If you can't find anything that's a perfect match, don't worry, you can just use the closest you can find. And then again, this is covering the full year, so I'm going to leave this as accountancy for the 22-23 tax year, and my figure from the example was £1,000. I'm not going to add any files, but I could at this point. Then on to phone bills. Again, I'm just looking for the most appropriate. I think phone, fax and broadband. But again, if you want to break it down in more detail, so let's go with phone and office 22-23. No private use adjustment. And this in total I spent £1,500 across the year. I'll save. And now onto the final category, we've got use of home as office. Now with this one, if you're struggling to work out which home expenses you can include in your self-employment calculation, then we have a handy calculator on the GoSimpleTax website, but we also have a full walkthrough video on the YouTube channel, so make sure you go and check that out. In this example though, I already know that my total is £500, so I can provide a description, which I'll just put as use of home. And then I can enter the full £500. And now you can see that we've got our £70,000 of income, less our £16,000 of expenses, which should leave us with a £54,000 profit, which is exactly what we were expecting. The tax figure has updated because we've added in these additional expenses here. It's reduced it down. And then from here, we can save and continue at the top if we're happy that that is all of our income declared on the return. And you can see that because at this point when you click save and continue, GoSimpleTax will run a quick check on your return to make sure you've actually included all the information that's needed. In this case, it's directing us back to the self-employment section as some details have been left off. So it looks like from here the postcode hasn't been entered, so I'm just going to input a dummy postcode and then I'll save that section. Now you can see here that the red banner has disappeared, which means that we've covered all the sections that we need to, but we do still have this yellow banner here which is encouraging us to declare any government support payments due to coronavirus. Now if that doesn't apply, then you can just ignore it, of course. It's also mentioning that because our income is in excess of £50,000, potentially, if you're claiming child benefit, you might have to start repaying some of that via the high income child benefit tax charge. I'm happy in this situation that none of those apply to me, so this is more like a little nudge for you just in case. So I'm going to say, yes, I'm ready to file, and I'm happy that no errors have been found. And then you can see we're presented with the standard questions that everyone has to answer, unfortunately, when submitting a tax return. Whether you have just employment income, just self-employed income, capital gains, you're always going to have to work through these ones. They're very simple, usually a yes/no answer question, so I won't work through all of them. The one that I will point out, though, in this situation is with regard to payments on account. So you can see here, are you claiming to reduce your 23-24 payments on account? So the way payments on account work, because I have a tax liability in excess of £1,000, or you may also have to make them if you don't have much tax deducted at source, HMRC will ask that you start paying towards the following year's tax liability. You make one payment by the end of January, which would also, I would also have to pay my 22-23 tax liability, which is currently 13 grand. You'll make one payment then, and you'll also have to make a payment by the 31st of July that follows. So the payments on account are 50% of the current year's tax liability, or the tax year that you're submitting for. So in this case, by the end of January 2024, I would have to pay my £13,000 liability, which covers 22-23, and I'd have to pay 50% of that again, which would be £6,500 or so, towards the following year's tax liability. I'll then pay another £6,500 or so by the end of July. And the good thing is that by the time you then get to the following year's tax return and you do this again, you will have already paid the tax liability, assuming that you have the same income. There may be a small top up or a small refund, but you'll be pretty much there. The only problem is if your income is set to fall next year, then you're going to be making a big payment on account, but then potentially claiming that tax back at a later date. So it's better not to do that, providing you can justify the fact that your income is going to fall. So if I'm happy, if I think, do you know what, my self-employed profits next year are going to be much lower because I'm not going to be working for part of the year, I'm taking more time off, I've got less work coming up, and I know that's going to be the case, then what I can do is I can click here, are you claiming to reduce your 23-24 payments on account? I can say yes, and then I can just determine how much those payments on account will be. So at the moment, like I said, they're going to be half of last year's liability, so £6,500 or so. If I think, do you know what, it's going to work out that I'll only need to pay £8,000 next year in total. So I'll make two payments on account of £4,000 each. I'll need to justify why that is the case. So I can say my self-employed income is going to be much lower next year. Okay, and whatever information you want to provide to justify that, you can do. Again, work through to see if any of these apply, but I'm not going to go through each one because they'll be different to everyone's situation. I can't tell you exactly how to answer these. At the bottom, what you can see is that you get an opportunity to attach forms and provide additional information. Now, when you attach forms, as we were filling out the tax return, if you attach an invoice or you attach a working or you provide a little bit of a note there, that doesn't actually get sent across to HMRC. But anything you provide here, any additional information that you provide here, will get sent across to HMRC. So if you want them to see it, this is where you'll need to put it. And then I'll save that. And by scrolling back to the top of the page, you'll then see a link to review your calculation and proceed. So let's just make sure that we're happy with the calculation. It's as we're expecting, and those reduced payments on account are showing here. So this is really useful to actually see how your income tax liability is being calculated rather than just paying it across to HMRC and not wondering about it. Again, you can use the question marks to get a bit more detail on what each figure represents, but my tax liability, income tax this is £9,000, £9,032. I've then got to pay class 4 national insurance of £3,834, which is based on your level of profits. It's a percentage of your profits over a certain level. And class 2 national insurance, which for the self-employed is £3.15 per week. And you can see here that I've been charged £166.95 for the full tax year. That's where my £13,000 tax liability came from that we saw on the previous pages. From there, you can also see that my reduced payments on account are applying. So by the end of January, I will need to pay £17,033 across to HMRC. And then by the end of July 2024, I'll need to make a second payment on account of £4,000, which again means that by the time we get to next year's tax return, I will have already paid £8,000 towards my liability. If you want to save down a copy of your tax return, if you want the detailed version, PDF of the paper form essentially, then you've got the option 2 at the bottom here. You can also save down an SA302. Now an SA302 is a summary of earnings, especially for the self-employed. It can be really useful, in particular if you need to borrow money, if you want to get a mortgage, they'll normally ask for your summary of earnings, your SA302, and this is where you can access that. Now I'm not actually going to go any further than this, but that was how to complete the self-employed pages of the tax return using our GoSimpleTax software. And as you can see, it's very, very straightforward, very easy to use, and can be done very quickly. From here, the only additional step would be to then submit your tax return, which you can do by verifying your identity, clicking on the next step, providing your details, and then making the actual submission. I hope you found that useful. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.